Value Network's webinar. What we have is a failure to communicate, a case study on scope. My name is Beidel Fedorchenko. I'm a senior legal project manager at Perkins Coie and a member of LVN's education committee. This committee is comprised of 15 individuals who have been working for months to develop a full slate of 2021 educational offerings for LVN members. We are focused on the content on 3 educational tracks: innovation, pricing and LPM, and beyond the technical. Before I introduce you to the program and its panelists, let me say a few words about the organization that brings this content to you. The Legal Value Network is a growing community of more than 800 business of law professionals. LVN's board and numerous volunteers are working together to bring its members curated content by way of webinars, the Council of Luminaries series, a monthly e-newsletter, its Off the Clock podcast, and recently published Legal Pricing and Practice Management Survey. LVN is also providing ways for this community to engage with one another through its roundtable programs, its Women's Initiative Forum, and of course, through its annual conference that is set for October. If you're not a member of LVN, visit legalvaluenetwork.com and select the Become a Member tab to sign up today and ensure you continue to enjoy all the offerings. In addition, be sure to follow LVN on Twitter and LinkedIn. Now, a few housekeeping items. The only video feed you are going to see is that of the presenters. Everyone will be on mute except the presenters. We will record this session and it will be available on legalvaluenetwork.com soon after this event. And finally, questions are encouraged and will be addressed at the end of the program. So please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar to post your questions. With that, let's get to our program titled, What We Have is a Failure to Communicate, a Case Study on Scope. It is difficult to overstate the importance of defining a matter's scope and clearly assigning tasks before any legal work commences. Effective scoping requires a great deal of communication between all stakeholders, especially when work is split between multiple law firms or alternative legal service providers. Some of the key questions that come up include, what happens when a complex matter arises? How can legal departments, law firms, and business partners effectively navigate the loose terrain of scoping? Where do clients perceive the most value from these conversations? Our panelists are here today to walk us through a case study to help identify and address best practices when it comes to scoping. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's panelists. Holly Montalvo is the Director of Legal Operations at Ancestry. Holly has extensive experience advising senior legal leadership on innovative and collaborative strategic growth, profitability, and operational and process improvement solutions. Paul Beidel is lead project manager at Shearman and Sterling, where he focuses on embedding tools, techniques, and behaviors to finding innovative solutions to service delivery. Tim Haley is a partner at Latitude, where, as a reformed lawyer, he leads the Indianapolis office of this legal service provider specializing in providing law firms, alternative legal service providers, and legal departments with former big law attorneys and paralegals. And our moderator is Justin Ergler, who has established himself as a thought leader and expert in the usage of AFAs for complex legal matters. Justin is Director of Alternative Fee Intelligence and Analytics at GlaxoSmithKline and board member at Legal Value Network. With all that said, let's talk scope.
Thanks, Basil. I appreciate the introductions. Welcome to all the panelists. Thank you all for participating. I guess let's get started. Let's just get into it. So, Holly, we'll start with you. We've been served with a complex litigation that has potential of major risk exposure and a potential for a class action. So we need to hire a law firm. We need to hire an ALSP. So what are some of the biggest challenges and disconnects that you see today when you engage outside counsel and or ALSPs regarding a potential new engagement like this one?
Yeah, and so when you kind of dive into, that's a really good kind of hypothetical scenario. I think talking about the communication piece is the topic today is really key. And I think even when you get to a targeted pitch, an RFP, where there's some formality to it, there's still that underlying piece where I see it, probably the biggest disconnect is that muscle memory to kind of go to what's familiar. And as you're engaging with both sides, outside providers, law firms, and also as you're working with your in-house team, to kind of almost fast forward to a familiar conversation that everybody's comfortable with. And it tends to kind of go to, let's talk about costs. We want to get this handled. And it's kind of the legal side and the cost side. And a lot of times, yes, those are important. But the middle piece is really the piece that you can't really get to any, there's no foundation. And it's like building the house until you understand, you talk about what is scope. It's not just, the complaint. It's who's involved. What are those business risks you talk about? Who are the stakeholders? Who's going to be involved? What do we know? What don't we know? And so sometimes, when I see the challenges, even, 20 years into this in the legal from different sides, we still have that kind of familiar muscle to kind of just think, let's go to cost, let's look at the legal issue. How big of a problem is this? And they don't want to stop and think about some of those devil in the details, those probing questions, open-ended questions, pauses. Hey, I don't have all the information we need. The RFP had this and that, but I can't really move forward unless I know X, Y, and Z. And having kind of a candid way to really get at the meat of what's going on. Because again, a win is not a win is not a win. You could legally win something, but that might not be the biggest, the biggest focal point. It might be that there's a business risk, or it might be timing. And a lot of times when we skip past scope and just kind of focus on one aspect of it, it's the elephant in the room, and then you can't go back. You can't go back and say, oh, by the way, this has happened or that's happened. So there's that disconnect early on is where I think we've got to really focus and be candid, that you've got to sometimes stop, get the parties involved, and just be really candid, and be open across, with all the partners you're dealing with.
So Paul, hearing that, from a law firm side, getting partners in the firm in general to buy into LPM techniques like scoping and pricing and planning, what are the biggest challenges that you see in that arena?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're conscious of the challenges. We're trying to change the habits of a lifetime, right? So 10 years ago, 13 years ago, the financial crisis, clients were looking for cost savings and transparency. So legal probably had a target on its back right away. So we at Shearman, right, we kind of take a long view. So we're dealing with the growing pains of any new kind of function. Like you can think about HR or BD and marketing being rolled out at a firm for the first time, right? So I think really we focus on making it easy. So LPM, pricing, scoping, planning, budgeting is easier to use now than it ever was. We've improved like our internal tech and process offerings. And then the other thing that we really leaned into with the partners and clients, right, is being proactive. So not just talking about how we can do reporting or put together analytics dashboards or video series and training, right? We actually develop those and go out and test them with the partners and with clients as well. And we're doing that every day and taking iterative feedback. So I guess my question for Holly with the case study would be, you said we're going to evaluate 3 to 4 targeted firms. My first question is, what's the differentiator for you, right? Is it price? Is it glossy pitch document? Is it discounts? Is it the most experienced law firm?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And what I would say first is I keep the price, the cost last. Because when you start to first look at, we're obviously going to outside counsel because we've got a complex problem to solve. It's not something routine. It's not something that's just, every day we check a box. So typically people, will say to you like, well, where are the price points coming in? That's last. I first look to see anybody that's pitching, they've got the team, they've got expertise in that area. So it's not as if, oh, we've got to just qualify and make sure that, what you've got in your RFP, you can do. It's usually somebody that we've used before. But typically I do it the opposite way. I start vetting. I have very, very tight RFPs where I don't want mini novels, where you've got people just going on. Try to get to what is the strategy and approach. And again, early on, you don't have everything you need. But if you're first looking at the legal side to it, kind of give us what your executive summary is, and then give them an opportunity to ask some questions so that before they give their final product, they've been able to have, we've had some, as I call it, two-way and communication that's real, hard questions that can be asked. And then second, when you start to look at, to your point about the glossiness, no, because you can see the prettiest bow wrapped. It's got every single thing in it. And I've been on the law firm side and I get that. It's got to look clean. It's got to be, but I'm more concerned about the substance of it. Does it get to the point? And less is more. And when you tell somebody we want 8 pages, keep the bios separate, guess what? When somebody doesn't follow, you know, if we've got some things we really need to see, this is another area. I kind of know, as you mentioned that, you tell in the RFP certain things you need. And what you can sometimes see is if you get a response where they're cherry picking and they're starting to tell just the story they want to tell, maybe they don't know all the details we know behind the scenes yet, but if they're just kind of so focused on, like, we're just ignoring those 2 other points you wanted to answer, but we're going to use our, you know, X number of pages to go on to this point, you've just told me that you weren't listening, you know, because it's very detailed. So if you'd say, I didn't understand. So if you're not following directions, you're kind of going ad hoc. And the other key is, if you're not answering the questions we've asked and we've had a time period to kind of flush out, you know, the clarity, that becomes a flag because you're wasting everybody's time at a certain point because you're just kind of at that point evangelizing. Be targeted in your approach.
So Holly, how do you foster two-way communication when so many RFPs are restrictive when it comes to being able to contact the managing attorney specifically? How can our law firms and our ALSPs know what the managing attorney wants to see when they can't talk to her?
And that's a very good, and that's an area that I would say is that push and pull that's still a work in progress. And to your point, Justin, you give an open period where everybody can ask questions and then you have to share the answers with everybody because of course that's fair. But to your point, it again becomes safe. Like, oh, okay, so somebody's asking this question and now I know this. And so what I would suggest is, again, as you're engaging and there's certain rules you got to follow, try to think, this is where you can think outside the box during this period, is maybe ask for, hey, can I send in some supplemental materials? Because, you know, you've asked these 3 questions and now I've seen 3 other areas that you didn't ask for within the RFP, but I'd like to share with you. You kind of ask permission. And when you become that firm, back to the communication, that's asking more questions, trying to ask for clarifications, it starts to tip off that they're really listening and they're really thinking about maybe issues that we aren't even realizing. If I have some of our outside counsels not asking questions and just all of a sudden submit something, subconsciously, I see a little bit of a flag because I'm thinking, you know, everything's not going to be detailed here. Yeah, we don't want you going, you know, over a certain page limit. But if you're just quiet and I get something back, there's going to be questions. And to your point, Justin, there's not a holy grail because it is a formal process. You can't say, let's just jump on the phone and noodle through this. But what you can do is, I've seen this happen successfully, is push back. Hey, you mentioned this in the RFP, but we know with our experience, know that there's a couple of other issues you haven't asked us to address. We'd like to, you know, that kind of dialogue. And then all of a sudden the legal team starts thinking, wow, these folks are saying things that we didn't even think of. And just kind of, I would say kind of pushing back, but push back when it's meaningful. Don't push back so that you can just put in a mini novel, but push back if you don't have the information you need to give as targeted and as strategic of an approach, you know, within those confines.
Understood. So Tim, let's shift to you. So why would or should clients and or even law firms bring in ALSPs to this scoping discussion for this hypothetical matter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the conversation on the disconnect between, you know, maybe what the law firm wants to offer and what the client is looking for is sort of a perfect example of where ALSPs can fit in. I mean, as a community, the ALSP world it's a service to law firms and to companies, and Where I know we fit best in is in those gap filler roles, where maybe, for example, a law firm is missing a particular subject matter expert on something, or maybe an in-house legal department is trying to manage more of the internal, pre-discovery, discovery type process than it has capacity for. Those types of different tools are things that we could use. And maybe you need an e-discovery team, or maybe you need a tech solution, which I'm personally less familiar with, but those tools are out there. And it's just like, as landscaping season here, right? I mean, you could landscape your yard yourself, or you could call a contractor to do it. And maybe they've got the tools for it, maybe not. Maybe they have to go rent something. Maybe you have to rent something. It's a similar type of similar type of economic landscape, we'll say, where ALSPs can be those gap fillers to help bolster a law firm's RFP, or to help increase a legal department's capacity to handle something complex in-house a little bit. So yeah, we can, the ALSPs can work together with everybody to make to find these solutions.
So who's typically reaching out to you in an RFP process? Is it typically clients? Is it typically law firms? How is that kind of flowing, or is it a mix of both?
Yes, it's a mix of everything. It's one of the first questions I have to ask when I get a call is, okay, how far into the scoping are we? What communications have been had? And I know Paul and Holly probably have the same issue, because a lot of times, attorneys are communicating together, and then they're like, hey, we've got a project, here, go. And so part of the biggest challenge is trying to figure out, okay, what's already been done? And we can't, and none of us can come in and undo what's been done. But figuring out where what's been completed and what's still left open. What are those, that Holly mentioned, what still is unknown? What I've found is when I've been in joint scoping meetings with client and law firm, I can ask hard questions that maybe they don't want to ask of each other. Like, do you guys have enough lower paid associates to work on this right now, right? I can ask those questions. I mean, how much extra hours do you need? And the law firm can't ask those questions for obvious reasons. And the attorney, the client company isn't, they don't want to put the law firm on the spot, but I can be that sort of bad guy in those joint conversations, which is not being a bad guy, but helping foster that communication process, just because we're all three in the same room and we're all looking at it from a different perspective.
Interesting. So Paul, so you get this request from Holly that she needs a law firm to handle a new complex matter. What are the first things that immediately pop in your head as far as what do you need to know to develop that proper scope? And I guess as a piggyback on that, have clients gotten better at asking the right questions? Because sometimes as a client, I'll admit, as a client, we're not always good at articulating our needs.
Right.
And
Yeah,
sometimes
good.
that's very difficult. So what trends have you seen in client RFPs, and what do you need to know, and are clients getting better at giving you what you need to know at the outset?
Right. So I think for the complex litigation, right, whether it is a class action litigation in the US or M&A deal in Tokyo, right, the challenges are the same. Getting people to come together, the client, the ALSP, talk about scoping, what's the background of the matter, why are they doing it, right? Who benefits from it internally? Is it the procurement team reaching out, right? Or is it the general counsel? Is it someone in the business? Because they all have different needs and goals internally, right? Someone might want lower cost. Someone might want, CEO of the firm might want, to win the litigation no matter what, right? Or to make it go away through settlement really quickly. So I think just getting all those key players kind of involved early, identifying what the deliverables are, what the goals of the client is, right? And then that becomes sort of your North Star. So things are going to change while you're going towards completing the matter, right? But you shift and the budget changes and you keep everyone informed. Maybe you resource a little differently, all tying back to the initial kind of objectives, right, of the client. And then I think as far as trends, right, the majority of pitches that I've seen and we see in 2021, they're all calling for innovation, price certainty. Of course, people are asking for the best discounts that they can possibly get, right? Project management. And then again, they want to know, okay, you guys are saying you have these client value functions like LPM and knowledge management and data, but how did they benefit us last year, right? What that translate into cost savings, and then how are you going to benefit us this year? So just jumping back to, that's a difficult question to answer. Are clients getting better? I think they're getting better, right? But there's, we're still moving towards a point where we really want to understand what a client wants, because they might say, the one I see all the time is we want creative fee arrangements, or we want, right? And then it's kind of like, what do you mean by that? What does creative mean in your organization, and what is valuable for you guys, right? Is that just getting the cheapest price, or is it winning every matter, or completing every investigation in a certain amount of time?
And
Okay.
to your point, and it's you hit on something, Paul. When it used to be AFAs and all the different, buzzwords, fee arrangements, we want, certainty, we want all these pieces. And sometimes the interesting part of it is they're kind of nibbling around the area, which is we're coming to you because we're not sure what kind of fee arrangements we need. It sounds silly, but it's like, be innovative, be creative. And then you start asking probing questions. Is it cost? Is it certainty? Is it? And then pretty soon, everybody threw out that AFA. And I think, as Tim was saying, also not understanding what they're really asking for, like what's the driver behind that? Okay, is it that procurement is, key in this? And there's a number, or this is a matter that's just got to go away. Well, why? And I think sometimes to the point when you're trying to get this information, really good probing, open-ended questions. Like, I have a good example. So somebody was telling me that this is routine. We don't need to scope this. It could end up costing us a lot. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, they're not telling me, this isn't about the company, or it's not this. So you start asking these probing questions like, what's the timing on this? Because if you're engaging with the attorney and you're trying to qualify it in these buckets, you can kind of get this runaround where they're just saying, be creative, no surprises. What's driving that? Is it really cost? Is it a risk? So if you use some of these probing, open-ended questions like timing, good example. Well, yeah, this transaction needs to close in 6 weeks. Okay, guess what? That routine transaction you just described to me was just routine, but in 6 weeks now, we've gone from, and it's not because the legal piece of the transaction, but it's the timing. So when you're hearing that we want this, this, and this, find out with questions and pushback, what's driving that? Is it that they think they need to ask you for an AFA, or I got to have a discount because they've got an initiative at the company and it's real? Or is it just hey, give me that rate discount because I'm the biggest one to say a discount doesn't deliver value. What's driving this? So when you're getting that push, really try to understand through other questions. And then I always will try to think of, I read in a book, it was a really good point about communication that's quiet, meaning ask a big open question and then don't say anything for a while. Let them continue to speak, and then pretty soon you sometimes get them answering it, and then it leads to something else, and then you go, aha, so give them that question, trying to find that, and then be a good listener.
And that kind of brings to mind, as far as the acronym AFA, Stuart Dodds at Positive Pricing is LVM board member, good friend, and he calls it, rather than an alternative fee arrangement, an appropriate fee arrangement. So kind of what you're talking about is asking questions to determine what is the appropriate fee arrangement for this matter based on the needs of the client. So Tim, can you help me understand, how can ALSPs help be that conduit? As you said, kind of the bad guy sometimes, but how can ALSPs help clients and law firms come together at developing appropriate fee arrangements?
Yeah, bad choice of words, I guess, but good
No,
good guys for everybody. But no,
There you
part of it is what ALSPs do is by definition, not what a law firm does, not what an in-house legal department does. These are other options that are out in the world. And so when there are imperfect solutions or problems, just understanding what options are out there can help solve some of the problems. So, for example, like e-discovery is an example that everyone's familiar with, where you can, go out and hire a team of, review attorneys to manage large e-discovery projects. And that's one tool, and it's become accepted. There are other tools out there to solve, and that came about because there was a need for lower cost document review and an ability to provide it. So it came from a problem in the marketplace, and there's other alternative legal service providers, however you want to say it. There's other service providers that have some solutions for some of these common problems that come up, whether it's whatever it is. Like when I'm coming into this class action dispute, I mean, the question, the version of who is my client that I have to think about is, am I trying to help the in-house legal department fill a gap, or am I trying to help the law firm fill a gap? Sometimes the answer is one, sometimes the answer is the other, sometimes the answer is both. And that's all fine. I mean, the reality is the skill sets of an in-house lawyer are entirely different than the skill sets needed to be a law firm attorney. And that's true even in the litigation context. So figuring out okay, where really are the gaps? I mean, those are the discussions that I would bring into the conversation. Like, okay, what's the problem? And is there a way that, me or somebody like me, is there a solution out there that is available? And in the end, this is a collaborative process, and success from the ALSP's perspective is success on the law firm perspective, but also success on the client perspective. So we're out in search of win-win-wins, which is it's what we get to do. So it's kind of fun.
interesting.
Tim, can I ask
So,
you a question?
Go ahead, Colin.
From your perspective too, because I think sometimes there's that disconnect of the in-house it's not that they don't have the interest to know more about the ALSP, but they kind of feel as if, hey, that usually the law firm's kind of controlling that. And I see where there's a connection where you can kind of bring all three in, where it's, not necessarily always win-win-win. Are you seeing any kind of trends where you're getting more of that access? You might get in a meeting with all three, because I think that could help bridge some of that unknown that the in-house counsel says, oh my gosh, we're paying for a law firm, and now we've got this other party. It just can start to almost mount like the cost, the fear. There's so many layers here.
Yeah, it happens. It's still relatively rare to sit down, at least for me, but it happens. Usually what happens is either the law firm, the scoping discussion's done, and the law firm sits back and they're like, oh man, how are we going to do this? And then, in that situation, I'm working with the law firm. Or similarly, a client will sit and say, the scoping is done, and they'll say, oh man, how are we going to do this? And so then it's, the conversation's just with the client company. But, depending on where you are in the process, you can, at least in my experience, typically I'm coming in on the backside to try to help fix an issue. And usually that can be traced back to that initial scoping meeting. But I do think it's more productive on the front end, because having the discussion with all three groups at the same time will allow for more certainty, and certainly in pricing ultimately, but also in scope. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. Let's divide it up. And the classic one that I saw when I was practicing is, all right, we've been served with this lawsuit. Okay, who's going to manage discovery, right? And sometimes the client company is like, I can't handle this. You guys do it. And sometimes they're like, no, we've got the team, we can handle this. Let us do this, and we'll send you our documents, and we'll make our witnesses available. And just, I mean, that conversation is pretty typical, I think, in pretty much any litigation discussion. And I mean, just getting that far is pretty good. But yeah, those are different ways that having that discussion at the front can help, because yeah.
So, Holly, something you had said earlier is that if law firms aren't asking you questions as part of an RFP and they just submit a proposal, you're a bit cautious about that. It kind of throws a flag to you that they're just giving you their standard shtick. So, but how would you advise outside counsel attorneys that are hesitant to pepper their clients with questions for fear of being a nuisance to their clients and looking like they don't know what they're doing?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think it's a delicate balance, but I think when, looking at the perspective, when you go out for an RFP, you're usually going out because it's something complex. It's not just your garden variety. Hey, we've got an employment issue. You're going to have a couple of calls. It's something significant. And so when you look at it in that way, at that early juncture, you've got some of the legal facts, you've got pieces. And on both sides, you're not going to have everything you need because, you've not been able to talk to, you don't have all the questions answered for the scope. You're at the early romance stage. You have to be on an RFP where you can't have side conversations and say, hey, we're throwing this out there. And you give some question and answer periods, which I think is necessary. But to your point, there's always going to be things that aren't known and, you don't know. But as you start to engage on the RFP, and I've read through so many of these, there's always going to be some nuance. And so when you start getting during that question period, you don't get, let's say you've got a top firm and they don't have any questions, and that can happen. There's just always, and I don't know if this is just the nature of the beast, but it'd be like anything in life. If you're preparing for something that you're submitting, even just having I want to be clear on this, here's a question, it might sound silly. There's always usually something you can ask, because you can read a sentence that an attorney has drafted asking for something, and you can read it 3 different ways. So I look at it as if you've got like the core of what you might need. You don't have a lot of these back end pieces. And if you're coming to the outside counsel, where are those areas of the unknowns? We don't know yet, because you don't know if there's a hostile witness. You don't know if the risk is.
So what a way of putting it is, sometimes when you ask the right questions, when you ask good, solid questions, you can be viewed as an outside counsel lawyer as helping a client to look around the corner.
Yes.
Helping a client to say, oh, geez, you know what? We didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Or that's something and I guess that's the nature of complex litigation, isn't it? It's complex. So that's why we're coming to you. So I guess the message to law firms and to our law firm friends on the phone would be, if you have good clarifying questions that you need to ask them. Don't sit silent and assume.
And that's what's interesting that you mentioned that. We always talk about scope, assume nothing. Assume nothing on the other side also, to your point, because if it's a complex issue, there's always something else. And think of the corporate perspective. They have this issue hitting them. It's new to them possibly, because it's a cutting area of law, or it's just a new challenge they've never seen. On the other side of the fence, if I've got a couple outside counsels that are experts in this area, you've seen this show before probably, or at least you're aware of with other cases or other clients in that industry, you're going to know more about some of the early issues before those issues are known in public market. So if you can say, hey, you didn't mention X and Y, but we just want some clarification because guess we've seen this could be an issue. Doesn't mean that that's the home run, but I'll give you an example. Somebody that just checks the box, we get the RFP back. They don't ask any questions. So let's give them benefit of the doubt. They're just on top of it. I get the RFP, we start culling through it. We start looking at what the strategy looks to be, and they've nailed everything. You're correct, Justin. Somebody cannot ask a question and maybe just have that RFP that jumps off the page, but 9 times out of 10, back to communication. There are too many things in a complex matter that, to your point, help us see some things early that we didn't even put in the RFP, because it shows us that you're becoming that trusted business advisor that
Right.
we'll pay for that all day long.
So I've got a question, Holly, actually for both you and Paul. I mean, we're talking about this in the context of an RFP, but scoping, there isn't one scoping discussion. There's a whole series of discussions, and usually, at least when I was practicing, I wasn't in the room for all of them. How do you on the client side, and how do you on the law firm side manage that iterative process?
It's complicated because it's not a point in time. So I would say with scope, I look at everything, even if it's not a litigation, transaction, in phases, because scope can start as A, and it could be this, and then all of a sudden something happens. We all know there's always going to be change, whether it's a business issue, something happens in market. I mean, you name it. And so you can get more wrong if you're so strict with your scope. So you say, I want soup to nuts if this goes to appeal, and it's like, wait, hold on. We're trying to be too perfect and dot every I and T, and we know things are going to happen. So back to the point about when you communicate, there's got to be trust, and you've got to have some honesty and candor. So you as the law firm, if something starts to go awry and it wasn't in the scope and it wasn't even something we identified as a vulnerability, but things happen, you gotta engage back early. You gotta reset. Hey, guess what's happened? Now we've got this person has become a hostile witness, or this deposition, we're gonna need 3 more, or whatever it might be. Back to communication. You can't just let it fester and say, well, we'll deal with it. We'll wait. We'll see what happens. You got to get on, So even if that communication is figuring out how you're going to communicate with the client, and that's an important part too. Asking your client after you've engaged, how do you want to communicate? Do you want weekly updates? Do you want to do it on the phone? Do you want to have meetings? Do you want to have email updates? What kind of reporting do you want on this? So the communication of not only the scope, but as it gets underway, how you're going to deal with things as they transpire, because you're going to hit bumps, and then you're going to have your scope change. But you got to make sure that all sides are on the same page. It's agreed to. It's not I thought you knew. I thought. It's back to that assumption, back to the communication. It's got to be constant, and you've got to be willing to share the good and the bad and the ugly. So if something's happening that could really go sideways, get on it early. Because, if that starts to happen and it goes too far, then you'll be at that point where you can't fix it. So I would say you got to do it. It's not a one and done. You don't say, hey, guess what? We've got scope done. Check.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd say on the law firm side, right? Ideally, there would be an engagement letter or a pitch document that I can find internally and read and look at, but that's not always the case, right? So we might get pulled in as an LPM, when there's an issue, right? Maybe we worked on something out of scope, and, the fees have started to build up like in some bucket, right? And then at that point, I'd say, let's go to the client and tell them, okay, we worked on this, it was out of scope, we didn't tell you, right? We screwed up, but how do we improve this going forward, right? How do you want us to do reporting and tracking on different tasks and phases? Who's the person internally at Ancestry.com, right, Holly? Who do I go to and tell them, escalate this kind of issue? So I think I agree with you guys. It's constantly changing. Scoping is not a point in time activity. You're doing it throughout the life cycle of the matter.
Well, and in context too, with a whole bunch of other matters on both sides. Yeah. So it's.
So Paul, I'm going to put you on a spot. I got a question from a good friend in our Q&A here. So do you think clients are getting better at creating an appropriate space to collaborate on scope? Because I know oftentimes I've heard from my friends on the law firm side and the Alsp side that oftentimes clients are kind of like very hands off on, they don't give you the information that you need. So do you think clients are getting better at creating that safe space to ask the questions that Holly's talking about and make law firms feel comfortable in asking those scoping questions and developing scope and agreeing on scope and things like that?
Yeah, I think they are definitely getting better, just in terms of building out the departments, right, and having more kind of legal ops professionals that maybe someone like me can interact with instead of just the partner talking to the general counsel, right? So you have all these different touch points of people that can gather information. Certainly BD and marketing have both grown on both sides. Those people can be talking. So I think you have a lot more people communicating now than ever before. And then I guess, maybe something not right when you're responding and answering the questions. I think maybe sometimes for a law firm is like, we don't want to give our case strategy or something right before we know we're going to win the work. So I think that's a delicate balance too, is not over providing information. Does that answer your question?
No. That makes perfect sense. It talks about kind of the balance between presenting a robust proposal and perhaps oversharing to where you're giving free legal advice, basically.
Yeah. Because I know we've overshared. I know we've overshared. I've seen a client say, "Wow, you really overshared. We thought we would have paid for this, so let's take it out."
Right.
Exactly. Like you've just, and the other part too is to get away from just that, cookie cutter, here's the RFP. And I know from being on the law firm side, there's a lot of research and time. You can't just keep just responding to RFPs and doing research and giving, to that point where you just keep saying, wait a second. Something I'd offer is where an ops person from the law firm, I was a safe person to talk to because I'm a business person. They would ask me questions and say, and this actually, I had a situation where, hey, that's great. We're going to respond to this RFP. There's a couple of questions we could ask that are boiler, nothing drastic, but we really think we need to engage with you in a, in person, or in our case, a Zoom environment, to kind of pitch and then ask some of the, whether it's your general counsel or your head of litigation, we'd like to kind of come in with a pitch. And it's not just, and I get that then all parties that are going to be pitching this could do a 30-minute pitch. And it was one of these cases, and we're in the pandemic, where typically, if you start to think of going in person and traveling, but now look at, again, change in market, we're in Zoom. To have a 30-minute call on Zoom is people are, we're doing this, it's working. And so it's kind of pushing back saying, we can respond to your RFP. This wouldn't be with every RFP, but if there's some nuance to it where we kind of want to get in, roll up our sleeves, we got to ask a few more questions. Would you consider with this pitch that we could do a 30-minute where you could ask us, we could ask you? Well, we didn't put it in the pitch because typically, for this one, we hadn't thought of that, but we ended up doing that. And it came from a client kind of pushing us. And their point was kind of being driven by, yeah, we can write this up in the RFP, but we kind of need to get with you. And we get that there's certain things you can share and certain things you can't. But they kind of pushed and said, could we ask for that 30 minutes? Now, not every time will you get that. That might be no, we want you to do it this way. But in this case, it was kind of unique. We ended up going that route. So I guess what I would share is sometimes as things are changing in market and you can see a need, ask for that, because the only thing that they can say, you have nothing to lose. All they can say is no. Well, we're going to handle it this way. Here's your questions. We'll let everybody have the answers. But again, that's where if it's a calculated risk that makes sense and you've got the expertise and you can say, let's try this. I think that's more of where that collaboration and communication can really get us to a more aligned position, because you don't know what you don't know. And we don't know some of these risks that you as the law firm with the ALSPs might be able to say, hey, we need to really be focused on these other three things too. So I would just kind of offer that as be willing to take those calculated chances and ask.
So I guess that's a good segue into a question we got from another good friend. What single item would each of you present as a way to improve the communication surrounding scope? And I'll add to that question, a question from another friend, that how do you recommend law firms communicate with clients? Is it scheduled check-ins? Is it ad hoc? Is it so? Basically, from the three of your perspectives, what are some tips on how clients and ALSPs and law firms can communicate better? Tim, can I start with you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think there's still, in spite of the fact that ALSPs and legal service providers are commonplace, there's still a tendency for both law firms and company clients to be kind of coy with each other about using them. And some company clients in RFPs will require law firms to say, hey, yes, I've at least considered using an ALSP or some alternative providers. Some don't, but even in those cases, it's often both are kind of very coy about what they're doing with alternative legal service providers. And I don't think that's beneficial to anybody because, I mean, really, this is, you know, if a law firm is utilizing an alternative tool, I mean, that's for the client's benefit. And of course, the client would be thrilled to know that the law firm is doing something for their benefit. And if the company is using the ALSP for something, then, you know, it's something that the law firm doesn't have to necessarily think about. So in terms of scoping. So I think just having more open communications, especially on matter specific stuff about, all right, we're not going to use the firm for this because we've got this other thing here, or we're not going to use the firm for this because we're going to do it in-house, or, you know, whatever else, or the firm saying, yeah, we're going to use an ALSP here because it's for your benefit. Those conversations should not be taboo.
Good. Paul, or I'm sorry.
Who wants? Paul, you want to go?
No, you go, Paul.
All right, you called me. I'd say maybe one thing I think would help a lot is the client kind of demanding accountability, right? So if we're putting into pitch documents that we have these legal ops people and teams that are going to help with scoping, and you see their picture in the pitch, right? When it actually happens, make sure they're in the room too, not just 5 senior partners, because I'm conscious that probably does happen more often than not. And then I think just everyone, you know, be willing to ask more difficult questions and be candid about what you don't know and what you do know, right? Just setting out, okay, here's the assumptions we made. Here's all the things we don't know. And here's the things based on our experience and knowledge and history of doing this. And then maybe like we overlay some data analytics or prescriptive data analytics, right? Here's the things that might happen. And then everyone sort of agreeing, right, that we don't know all this information. So this scope is, and this budget is based off what we know right now, but when it changes, right, we would tie like pretty much every scope to a budget. That's going to change too, right? And the price could go up or down. And it's beneficial for everyone. And I think it's beneficial for everyone to know that and understand it and kind of honor that agreement.
Yeah, and that's important. And I would say, as we know in the industry with like LPM, and it's, you know, you've got Lacey and Racy and Daisy, all these ways to manage a matter, which is who's driving it, who's accountable, contributing, all these different mechanisms. But what I would say is keep it simple. And when you have a matter and it's got complexity, use it like in a story problem kind of scenario. You know, you're driving cross country, you're going on a vacation, you need to know who's in the car, where you're stopping, what the costs are, what goes wrong. You've got, you know, you check the weather. So I always kind of try to, when I'm talking with both sides, in-house, our attorneys, maybe an outside firm, outside provider, is who are the people that need to be informed on things? Like, I don't want my attorney to get email blasts every week that maybe me and ops could handle. And if I can handle that, I've just taken away a lot of, you know, the noise that really can be the friction. And so it's almost like when you're engaging on the matter, ask the client, how do you want to be communicated with? It sounds simple. Do you want emails? Are there certain days that are better? Oh, I want check-ins. How often? Who needs to be on that? Because what will happen is sometimes the attorneys have a call regarding the matter and they don't tell the ops people that something's changed in scope. Like, oh, guess what? We've got to do this. So you got to kind of have that communication and trust so that if I'm talking with you, Paul, and we're working on this complex matter, and I'm talking to my partner and you're talking to a couple of your attorneys and we hear something's rumbling, we can't always assume that they're following the scope and the plan that we've all agreed to. So we've got to make sure, you know, of the people involved, if we've got operations people from both sides involved, that's our best chance sometimes of keeping the communication glue. Because then I can call you in a very safe way and say, hey, I'm hearing from an update that this might be happening. Can you check on your side? Because this will throw our budget off. And the other two attorneys might have no idea what that little, you know, what that might do. So I think when we think of that communication, it's not just the formal, it's not just the attorney to attorney, but it's also if you've got an ops person or a business person on each of the sides, making sure there's a relationship you could build there. Because I think when you look at where things go sideways, it's that people send email blasts and people aren't reading, people aren't communicating. And then they say, I didn't know that happened. And I didn't know it happened until I got my invoice. And we're now, you know, 2/3 through our budget. So it's back to that. If you see issues early, communicate, but figure on the front end. And as it goes, who you should be communicating with, who are all the players, and how do you want to be communicated? Because I had a time when I was on the law firm side where a client, you know, we started finding out that they needed stuff on Thursdays because they had these Friday meetings. And boy, if you could have gotten me those updates earlier, well, we didn't know. And if you don't know, so, you know, you could, that's one of those questions, you know, how do you want us to track this? How do you want it communicated? What kind of report do you want?
Right. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the value of our community, you know, here at Legal Value Network of these business professionals on both the legal ops side and the business side of the law firms and in the business side of the ALSPs about if we can strengthen our relationships, we can improve communication across the whole ecosystem. So I think that's a great point. I know we did have a couple of slides, Holly, to kind of close out with. So if you wanted to bring those up.
Let me grab those. We'll start right here.
And some just some key takeaways from today's discussion. What we'd like to, I think with every webinar presentation, it's great to have takeaways, things to take back to the office or back to your home office, I guess, in this instance. But go ahead. So for the legal department, Paul.
So from the legal department.
Oh, Holly, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I would just say we've talked today about communication. So this is no surprise, but I can't emphasize this enough because this is the key piece. You've got to know the other perspective. And again, we've talked a lot about it. Just assume nothing. Don't say, well, I thought, or, you know, I figured. Ask more probing questions. And then when we talked about that muscle, you know, we tend to be creatures of habit. So the more you get used to asking some of those probing questions, or if somebody's just coming at you with something that you know is unrealistic, you're not calling something out. You're just, they're coming to you to solve a complex problem. And they just, you know, we don't want to just hear what we want to hear. We need to know what we need to know. And if you're coming at it and you've got the experience and you're seeing some flags, be candid, be open, because you need to have a relationship based on trust. You know, you can't play it safe. And then kind of talking about what a win looks like. It's not always the rush to, oh, we got to just win the case and you got to make it go away and we want to save money. What does win look like? You know, is it that it's legally we could win it, but it's a nuisance suit, so maybe we do want to go the distance? So it's really understanding that and being able to map it out from who's involved, what's the perspective. And again, do it in steps because things will change. And back to, you know, why that communication is key. This area is where I kind of like to leave talking about things, best practices to share, is thinking outside the box or the lines. be bold at times, courageous in the pursuit of shared interests. Not to say go out there and just, always come with out of the box thoughts. But if you're on the law firm side or the Alsp side, and you've got an idea and you've seen something work and you've got the expertise to back it up, and you've got this complex problem, don't just always think about like the RFP lane, play it safe, check the box, have the pretty bio, if you've got the experience and there's a compelling need where you'd say, hey, remember when they ask for those creative ideas? This might be something that, nobody else is thinking about or willing to share with you, but if it's got a shared interest, you've got the experience, be willing to take, that's what a partnership is, kind of risk and reward at the end of the day. And then just kind of communicate, collaborate, trust is key. Make sure you're aligning, resetting. And then I like the thought of repeat. It's not a point in time. So you start this, you got to go back. And sometimes, as we know, the matters can go in different ways. So really just keeping that cycle of communication going.
Okay, and Paul.
Hey, all right. So I put, and a lot of these takeaways I think I already mentioned throughout the portion. So sorry if you hear something repeated, but yeah, involve all stakeholders early and often, from an ALSP, from the client, internally at the law firm. I think just diversity of viewpoints and experience and knowledge, right, is going to improve any kind of scoping discussion. So you might have someone with experience in complex litigations, but then you also have someone who's experienced in project management and business, talking more about the numbers with someone at the in-house legal side. And then a confirmed scope makes required work and deliverables clear. I think that's pretty obvious until things change, but it also helps you know who to go to and talk to on the client side or at the ALSP side when things do go off track. And then scoping is not a point in time activity. I think it's something that we've talked about a lot today. You're always scoping throughout the life of a matter, I guess, until you get to the end. Yeah, just always be communicating as much as possible. You're going to learn new information. You're going to get better at scoping overall, having these difficult conversations with partners and clients as well. And then be disciplined. I think Holly earlier said, you talked about an example of someone, saying, well, we don't have to do the scoping on this one. It's going to be routine. And then eventually a problem may come up or arise, right? And you don't know who to talk to on the client side or how to approach them or what the problem even is, right? So I think it's just really important to do this in a rigorous procedural way. It's going to make everyone better at it, and you're also going to capture the most value, right?
All right, and Tim.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I touched very much of these takeaways, but hopefully at least some of them. The first one I know we talked about was, and that is the ALSP community or tools. I mean, we serve law firms and companies, and the tools can be, I think, taken advantage of when everyone's working collaboratively. And for a firm, as the firm is thinking about opportunity cost with its own attorneys and thinking about leverage in terms of pricing. Those are areas where the ALSP community can be helpful. It can help increase efficiency on certain legal matters in terms of you don't want your senior partners doing doc review, which is it goes without saying. That's the silly example. But there's other steps along the lifespan of a matter where you want to utilize your legal resources optimally. And whether that's people or tech or whatever else. And the gap filler component of the scoping, do you have voluminous discovery? Are there tech issues? Are there ways to replicate something quickly? Are you temporarily replacing somebody for whatever reason? These little things that come up from time to time are where ALSPs can be helpful. I think the early and the more open clients and law firms are on scoping discussions with their service providers, it increases options. I mean, we can come in and the same way that a law firm can work with a company and identify something that maybe they hadn't thought about, we can do the same thing with both law firms and companies. Especially if we're thinking, my world is flexible talent. So as we're thinking about staff workload, that's something that is really a key component of scope, but it isn't always something that is discussed or thought about openly between the law firm and the company, because it usually doesn't come up. But if you got 3 big cases in a row as a firm and you don't have the senior associates to handle that, 100 hours a week or whatever, maybe you do, I don't know. But stuff like that can come up, and those are things that ALSPs can help with. I had one more, but I've forgotten it, so it's okay.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, I think Basil, I think we're over time. So Basil, if you can take us out then.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you so much to Holly, Tim, and Paul for the wonderful and frank conversation around scope. And I think it's been a really good discussion. And thank you all for facilitating and participating in this wonderful conversation. I want to remind everybody that this recording, as well as all the takeaway materials, are going to be available on legalvaluenetwork.com, which you should make sure to visit to become a member if you're not already, as well as to find more information about our upcoming webinars, which we've been doing on a very regular basis, and we will continue to do regularly. So look forward to learning more about wonderful topics that we're going to plan on covering. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Basil.